Welcome back to the third episode of the Everything Higher Ed podcast. We've got a veteran here and we've got two newbies. Dr. Teague, I'll let you introduce yourself first, and then I'll go around the list. And Dr. Gosai.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me back, Kamar. I'm really excited to be here. I'm Dr. Jennifer Teague. I am Interim Provost, Executive Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs, and Chief Academic Officer of UMass Global, which is an affiliate of the UMass system, and we serve predominantly online working adult learners.
Nice. It's on you, Liz.
All right. I am Dr. Elizabeth Fogel. I am the National Director of Education for the Be On Air network of schools. We are a network of broadcasting schools in 4 different states.
Nice. All
It's
right.
good to meet all of you. Dr. Hemchang Gasai. I'm the Dean of Languages, Arts, and Social Sciences at Northern Virginia Community College. It's one of six. I'm the dean at one of the six campuses that we have, five of which are sort of comprehensive campuses, and one is almost exclusively medical and dental. We have a population of about 75,000 students or so, really across the nation, but primarily in the DMV area, with modalities that include a number of online classes, a large number of online classes, but also obviously with all of the various modalities that students are looking for. Anyway, it's great to be part of this panel again.
Absolutely. So it's really great to be able to gather and just kind of talk about, current events or things that are important to us in higher ed. But a couple of these topics were inspired by you guys, but the first one is was inspired by Dr. Gosai himself, and it was the death of the humanities, right? And Liz, I knew you were going to. This is why I invited you to this one. So I guess when we talk about that, Dr. Gosai, I'd love for you to kind of tell us how you think about that, and is that really happening?
Well, I think it's happening, frankly, in theory. I don't think it's happening anywhere near as much in practice and among employers. So, for example, one of the things that we discovered, in addition, by the way, to any number of essays and articles and opinions that have been written about the centrality of the liberal arts, about the humanities as foundational for what it means to be educated, broadly construed. But there seems to be a disconnect between what we hear repeatedly and then what we find within institutions. And most of my teaching actually prior to taking this position has been at a private college and at the research university. So this is my first foray into a community college. And one of the things that I'm discovering is that the idea of the humanities, and it's sort of, folks who are speaking about the death of the humanities, for example, it doesn't translate into the workforce and into careers and so on. What I have discovered, for example, I'll give you a very specific example. We were fortunate 3 years ago to receive a $1.2 million grant from the Mandel Foundation that focuses on the humanities. Now, that's a rarity, at least for us. Generally, we hear of these grants going into colleagues who are in math, science, engineering, and so on. And the concern there was preparing students for the workforce, but how do we function in society? And so as we began working with employers, particularly in the DMV area, repeatedly, regardless of the nature of the work, repeatedly we were told they are looking for students, they are looking for employees who are steeped in the humanities, who can think, who can be discerning. And then they say stuff that is very difficult to quantify, such as we are looking for qualities such as humility. And you immediately pause and you think, how does that fit into anything that we measure? Because, of course, higher education is consumed these days. I have to say I'm not one of those, but higher education is consumed with data and data points and so on. And I get it. But then we hear about the stories and about the experiences of employers and young professionals who are coming into the workforce. What are they looking for? And what we discover is the idea that humility, as it's translated into the sense of, am I able to take critique? Am I able to respond in a way that is actually constructive? And I don't take it as a personal, some kind of odd ad hominem, thing that. And so they're looking for young professionals entering who actually have the quality of civic engagement, who can speak with civility, who understands how you function in a community of folks who may have different opinions, but the capacity, for example, uh, to listen and not just as an auditory kind of quality that we hear you. And I know that's a throwaway line that goes on a bumper sticker. We're not interested in that. That's an auditory skill. But can you actually listen? And these employers are saying we want folks who could actually listen. That French philosopher Simone Weil famously said that one of the most generous qualities that we human beings can have is the capacity to listen to each other intentionally, give the time, be present. So it seems to me that so much of what we've been talking about the imminent death of the humanities, is something that I think if we sort of dig a little deeper, we realize that what we're talking about, how do you translate that into the workforce? What does that mean to function in society? And for me, uh, I mean, it's part of my DNA. I'm deeply committed to this. I think it's foundational. I think it is it's where we are rooted as human beings. And there are all kinds of important branches. I don't think they could survive without the rootedness of the humanities. That's how I think about it.
I really have to agree, Dr. Gosai, because it's one of those things. We've heard this phrase, the death of the humanities, for years. And as someone who has been through, I mean, I was an English teacher, so we've heard this for so long. And you're right, it's not that they're dying, it's a transformation. And we have to see that transformation happening right now because there is so much focus on these very specific skills, but there are so many transferable skills that people forget about. And so I think a lot of colleges are trying to get to that point where they're almost rebranding. And I know that's a huge thing right now. Everybody wants to rebrand everything, right? It's got to be flashy and new and it has to be exciting and technology. But this rebranding of what's happening so that it can be put into these, you know, durable skills or these applied ways to maybe put it into interdisciplinary programs, that's been a big push at times. But there are these skills that are so important. And I know everybody goes straight to critical thinking and ethics and that sort of thing. But it's even like in my industry. So my schools, we are media schools. And our students have to know about storytelling and how to do these things in a world where they're going to be radio broadcasters, they're going to be TV broadcasters, they might be podcasters and doing things like this. But they have to be able to do what you're saying. They have to be able to listen and have a conversation and be able to dive into things without seeming as though they're not understanding. And that's a critical skill that the humanities bring. So it's that transformation, and we have to figure out how that transformation happens in ways that people see the value in it. And that's unfortunate. To your point about data, everybody wants the data. They want to know, like, how is this helping? What's the return on investment? You know, why am I spending money for these things? because sometimes that return on investment is the long-term future of being successful over time in being able to communicate, to listen, to share, to understand what's happening and have critical conversations. So I think it's that transformation. So I don't really see the humanities, they aren't disappearing, but they're just being absorbed in different ways that maybe we need to keep thinking about how that happens in the future.
Who's next?
I'm happy to hop in because while I agree overall, I think there's a few specific call outs looking at it from a leadership seat in higher ed. And I'll start with just a personal anecdote that I have 3 degrees. 2 of them are in business related fields. And the first one, my dirty business oriented secret, is that the first one is in the liberal arts. And that is the degree that has had the most impact on me because it didn't teach me task. It taught me ways of thinking. And that to me is, regardless of data, regardless of external pressure that we're getting about the value of a college degree, that's the fundamental purpose of education. It teaches us ways of being, ways of thinking, how we value, what we value, who we bring into the conversation, and who we intentionally or unintentionally don't. So I think the humanities, where I disagree with Elizabeth is this idea of rebranding. And it's a minor point. I don't think it is about flashy marketing. I think it's about bringing an authenticity to what the humanities offer us as higher ed institutions. And you can look at things like the NACE competencies, and we tick those off. We say team building, critical thinking, technology, and we also have some, I think, more meaningful frameworks that have come out through, say, the World Bank and UNESCO and the UN with the Global Citizenship Education frameworks. Those are the ones that I think are actually the humanities wraps around. You don't have a class called critical thinking. I mean, some of us do. You have a class called critical thinking, and by the end you go, yeah, I critically think. It's imbued in everything that is part of not just a humanities curriculum, but even discipline specific curriculum. So in my mind, one of the opportunities I am excited about is for that, not just a rebranding, but that real reimagination, seeing the humanities and the liberal arts as the nucleus of all programs. That, often with gen ed, which is where we see a lot of our humanities as well, these are the classes that students will do almost anything to not have to take. These are the ones where, particularly in online learning, they'll pursue any kind of alternative credit so they can transfer those courses in and not have to sit in them. What that means is we have a really missed opportunity to talk about, in a safe space inside of a university, different ways of doing and thinking and being. So when we think about how do I show up as a good citizen in a global context, in a moment in history where division is the order of the day and the normal, how do we give our students not just the opportunity to develop workforce readiness skills for the day they graduate, but how do we give them lifelong skills? So to me, I see the humanities as that catalyst and as that vehicle first and foremost for our learners. I'm excited about the day that our students show up and can't wait to register for gen ed because there's contextualized experiences, there's modern experiences. I remember having to register for the US to 1877 and the US from 1877. And I wasn't excited about it then. I don't think I'd be excited about it now. But if I had the opportunity to experience, say, a course about the history of the American education system, well, now you've got my attention. What if I had the opportunity not to take Comp 1 and Comp 2, but I could take contextualized, using Elizabeth's school as an example. What if there was contextualized gen ed that not only I could apply in my career track, but I also would be able to walk away with some of those durable human skills. So I do think it's, rather than a rebranding, maybe a reimagination, but the commitment has to be there for the university to step back and say, how do we translate these skills through what mechanisms? And that's not by having a critical thinking module in a course. It's not by having, teamwork check in a course. It's by building these capacities. They're not skills. To me, they're capacities. By building these into everything that we do. And I'm sure we're going to talk about AI at some point because it's always a favorite topic. I think that digital literacy is part of that. That's part of being a good global citizen. Many of the competencies that you need to effectively and ethically use AI are actually our good old fashioned human/durable skills. So rather than separating those things out, I think adopting that nucleus approach that you almost have your humanities at the heart of everything, and then your specific discipline areas kind of spider web out from them.
Jeremy, we'd love to hear from you before we get some rebuttals.
Thanks, Kamar. Good afternoon, all. Jeremy Bean. I'm AVP of Enterprise Change and Transformation at Penn State University. Sorry, I was a little late signing on. I was in a meeting with our provost talking about much of the same things here at the university. So thank you all. Those were incredible insights and remarks. So, I mean, maybe I'll approach it from a slightly different area because I agree with most of what you've all said, the role that humanities plays and the importance of it. But the question that I seem to be getting all of the time and we're trying to tackle is there's becoming a gap in the world of hiring. A lot of entry level type of positions, like I can think of when I came out of school with my degree and where I started, and what I did. There was the opportunity to take what I had applied or what I had learned through my college uh, courses and start to apply it in the workplace. But it was at entry level, right? And eventually I worked my way up into different places and, started to have experiences that then started to show up on resumes that made me qualified for higher level jobs. What we're seeing, and what I'm hearing from our business and industry colleagues is a lot of those entry level positions are starting to disappear and they don't want to invest in the job training. They're saying we want your students to come out with the ability already proven that they've had experiences that show they know how to apply what they've learned, whether it's critical thinking or all of the beautiful things that you talked about that students learn in the humanities, because we're going to drop them into something that's not entry level any longer. It's going to be something they need to be able to apply what they've learned. And so, how do we translate from creating great learners to folks that now have experience to do? And I don't know that that's all on higher education. I don't know how we fix the experience gap in school. I know there's many things that we can do through the types of learnings that we provide, but there's still some on-the-job learning and growth that has to happen. So I wonder where that tripartite, the folks that are hiring our graduates, our governments that are hopefully helping to fund or subsidize education and higher ed work together to create that, or to fix that gap. And Jennifer mentioned AI, right? Everything says that they're going to even accelerate the loss of those entry level positions because they're going to start to be done by potentially artificial intelligence type of things. And I don't have an answer for how we do that. I know there's lots of thoughts and conversations there, but that's the gap. And a woman from Google put it really well at a forum I was recently at, and she said, "Look, I think higher education, you all do a fantastic job of creating these well-rounded individuals that know how to learn. But we're at a place where we don't have time then to teach them what they need to know or the experience that they need. You need to give them that in the way that you're teaching. So when I hire someone, I know they're going to apply everything that they've learned because they now know how to do. And if you can fix that gap, great. And again, I don't know, is that solely on us to figure that out, or is that some collaboration part of this? And again, I think that ties into the humanities College of Liberal Arts types of discussions here because those are those incredible skills those students learn that apply anywhere to anything you do, but they get lost in translation, I think, out in the world. That would be my take.
Love it. Love it. I'd open it up to rebuttals before we move to another topic, but good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah.
I,
Oh, excuse me.
Oh, it's not just a quick thought on what Jeremy was sharing. I wouldn't say so much a rebuttal as maybe an extension of the point about entry level jobs. I don't think entry level jobs are going away. I think that's the common narrative right now. But what it means to be in an entry level job goes away. And this is why those human skills become so much more critical, because rather than completing tasks, entry level will be supervising, in many cases, AI completing those tasks. So rather than focusing on task acquisition skills, we need to lean into these, from a practical perspective. How do I manage a team of AI agents? I keep reading that's the way things are going, particularly for entry level and mid level jobs, that individuals are going to be managing teams of remote AI agents. How is that different as a leader than managing a remote team or of humans or managing a team in situ? So if we were to eradicate the entire level of entry level workers, then we would create essentially another industrial revolution. And I don't know that we're quite there, but I definitely think it requires a rethinking of what skills, whether it's task or whether it's human skills, what skills as universities we have the ethical obligation to be able to rubber stamp and say our students can do that. And then I think that leads to a discussion about credentialing, which I will not hop into because I know that Dr. Gosse has some things to share. The idea is, how do you, if you teach these human skills, how does anybody know that they've been part of somebody's program? They don't show up on a transcript. So this idea of issuing, say digital badges or micro credentials to validate this person has experience in this particular human skill and can adequately apply it. How do you codify that for a student? And I think there's lots of discussions happening in that area too, outside of the traditional credit hour transcript.
Yeah, again, this is not a rebuttal. It's much more of an expanding of how we think about this. It There is likely some place among all of us who have taught where we have received a note from a student who said, you know, uh, Dr. Teague, I really appreciated your credentials. It doesn't happen. Students are not interested. They hardly read the syllabus, right? They're not interested in your credentials. They don't get enamored with your certificates. They are the students who respond, and I think it's only a percentage of the large number who would love to respond but don't. They respond to the qualities that go beyond the discipline that we teach. And I think we have to have a modicum, at the very least, a modicum of moral courage and intellectual courage when we enter the classroom. Uh, there is, we cannot only say, I'm here, I'm going to stand at the podium, I'm going to lecture for an hour, I'm going to tell you everything that you need to know about X or Y, and then I'm out of here. To me, to be educated has to, at the very least, involve some kind of preparation of how students enter into the world in which we live, which by any measure is both fragmented and fractured. And I don't know if simply avoiding how we think about relationships, how we think about functioning in the community, how we think actually the manner in which we speak, how we use language, all of these things, it seems to me, are critical as part of what it means to educate our students. And I believe that the real story of American higher education these days will land with how we, with frankly, open access institutions. Now, students who are coming from first generation, students who are not fully prepared because they have the kind of background at home or within the structure of a family or a cadre of friends, students who are working students who are adult students. And I know we have all kinds of fancy terms that we move from pedagogy to andragogy. Okay, fine. It's artificial, ultimately. We stop at 25 and there on out you become adult learners. But really, I know we have to make some distinctions, but at the end of the day, there are some core qualities and principles and values. And I think it takes moral courage not only by a single professor or even a division, but by institutions to make a commitment that when we say, as we do in our mission statement here, that we will provide an exceptional education for you, I ask, what does that mean? What does that mean to be educated in the world in which we find ourselves right now? And it cannot be it cannot be, well, I've taken advanced calculus. It can't be that alone. Or, marketing. It can't be that alone. It has to be how we relate with each other, understanding that we're steeped in certain disciplines, but how we function in society. And I think that takes a great deal of moral courage by institutions to say, we are going to provide education broadly construed so that when you enter into the world, understanding that the best among us are still penultimate. We are always going to change and grow as society changes, as the world changes. But are we prepared fundamentally? And that for me is an ongoing issue that I bring to the faculty and I bring to myself.
Liz?
It's one of those things that we have these conversations and we all get passionate about this, right? And we have all these thoughts, but then there's all these external factors that also come in that don't allow us to really thrive and do the things that we want to do. And so to go to Dr. Teague and Dr. Gosai and Jeremy, like everybody has these great thoughts. And we need to make sure that it gets outside of the conversations just about higher ed, because we have people outside of higher ed trying to tell us, what are you doing and how are you doing it? And so you have all these external people that are a part of the conversation that just don't understand the full context of it. So I think these conversations have to keep happening, but they have to also go outside of the academy and they have to reach the people who are trying to put pressures on higher education in ways that we don't necessarily control at all times. So I love that the conversations keep happening, and we just need to get the others outside doing the same thing.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because all of you guys talked about a transformation being needed, which was, kind of one of the topics as well. I guess I'm curious to, okay, we agree that a transformation is needed, but is higher ed prepared to make that transformation? And to Liz's point, are the external communities or factors also aligned for that transformation to occur, so that we don't forget about the humanities, if that makes sense. Anybody can start.
I don't think it matters if we are ready because the moment's already here. So where I think the transformation will happen is no one single institution saying, we are now innovative with a capital I, and here's how we're going to do things differently. The environment has shifted around us. It shifted in terms of how accreditation is viewed. It shifted in terms of demographics. It shifted in terms of employer expectations and student expectations. So whether you feel ready or not isn't really what's on the table. It's what are you going to do about it? And this is where I think having, Liz, I take your point, having these philosophical conversations is exciting and thought provoking. But what does it matter if we're not doing anything with it? It's writing that journal article that you and three of your discipline specific colleagues are going to read. It doesn't move the needle in the outside world. There are so many innovative with a capital I institutions out there, like the one that I'm fortunate enough to be at, who are embracing agility, not a word you typically associate with higher ed, flexibility and speed. And there are other institutions doing this as well to meet the moment. And so to me, it's not a transformation of the humanities, it's a transformation of how we deliver value to our students and ancillarily to their future employers. But also, how do we tell people that story? Because, I do love data. I will confess that right away. When I'm looking at data and it's telling me how our students are doing, that's nice. But am I sharing, the good news in communities and spaces that are helping to stimulate further action, not just further conversation? So the transformation, it is at an individual institutional level, but it's also the industry as a whole, recognizing that the academy is becoming a thing of the past. This idea that we can live in this compartmentalized environment, the environment and technology and social media and artificial intelligence and all the things that everybody tells us we should be scared about. We should be scared about because they're fundamentally changing how we live our lives. And if how we live our lives is changing, then, to Dr. Gossai's point, then how we define what educated means is also changing. And it does take, it takes moral courage. It also takes fiscal courage because you have to challenge models that have been working for us for a really long time. And that goes back, to the idea of what was the American higher education system originally intended to be. Our entire education system at a public level was meant to be a way to arm workers to participate in task-based skills. It wasn't to create leaders. It wasn't to create thinkers. And that's why we have so many challenges now delineating between task-based knowledge and those human durable skills knowledge. So I think there takes a bravery to say, what can I do differently? And then to put your money where your mouth is. So, where we're at UMass Global is right in the middle of some what I think will be transformative work, looking at things like micro credentials, but in a not a traditional way that we've been bandying that word about for a while now. What does it mean, and why does a student care about it, and why does an employer care about it? Giving weight to that conversation and participating in external work related to it. The other thing is how do we decrease time to completion in a way that students are able to still engage in becoming educated and at the same time have workforce ready skills to have a shorter pathway to walk right into jobs that are going to make a difference for them. So I'm really intrigued and enthused by institutions doing this work of saying 3-year degrees, accreditors are only now getting on board. There's concerns about, from employers, what does this really mean? Let's articulate that value. Let's not keep it an innovation that we pat ourselves on the back, inside these kind of circles, but that we actually articulate to the public, this is why this matters. They don't care about the details of how we're repackaging gen ed or cutting electives. That's not important to them. What they care about is, can I do this faster? Can I do it less expensive? But can I still walk out with the same value? And the answer can be yes if institutions are willing to commit to that and be on the vanguard of those kind of conversations.
And to your point with this, there have been schools for decades that have been trying these changes, these innovations, and doing things differently. And I know there are some stigmas with some sectors of higher education. And some of these sectors have been doing so, like, down to your point about micro-credentialing. It's been around for a very long time, my entire career. And so I work in the career education sector. And for our students, at most of my schools, we don't even offer degrees because it's more important for the students to learn in 6 to 8 months how to do radio broadcasting or sports broadcasting or whatever it is, to get those skills, have something they can do. Our students can go out and work at a TV station or radio station. They can start their own podcast, but then they can also come back to us for something else. And so maybe they finish in radio and television broadcasting, and then they're like, okay, now I can start my career, but now I need to learn more about audio engineering. And so they come back for audio production and they learn how do you edit audio and mix things together so it's even better. And then students come in for like the video production program and how do I edit videos better? And so all these different skills that they're having, and career colleges have done that for a long time. And how do we build that? But now we're also having to build it in shorter and shorter increments to get those students where they want to be. And we've had our employers, one of our accreditation requirements from the dawn of time of career education has been employer input. And so our employers are a part of every conversation every year talking about what's important to them. And we just had our national our program advisory meetings back in November. And we had employers across the nation talking about what can we do? Can we get students learning about AI even? So back to our topic of AI, that's something that's going to transform every day, every month. AI 3 years ago is vastly different than it is now. So you can't build a program and say, okay, I'm going to teach you this and teach that same thing. You have to be agile with it. To your point about UMass Global, you have to be agile and be able to change as you go. And that's sometimes hard for our accreditors as well, because the accreditors are like, get this program approved. We need to see everything, and change happens more slowly, and the accreditors have to learn those things. And as someone who goes on accreditation visits and gets to have these conversations, I at least have the ear of some of the accreditors to say, hey, you need to change too. And so it's this domino effect of everybody having to be a part of that conversation, all the constituents knowing what's the end goal, what do we want from this, and how do we make it happen. And we're going to have to start doing so more quickly. And education hasn't traditionally moved quickly. And we're in that point of the world, we have to figure out how to move quickly. And to your point, it's here. It's not coming. It's here, and we got to figure it out now. And the best analogy I heard somebody use recently is the plane's already flying, and we got to figure out how to fix it while it's flying. And that's where we're at today.
Jeremy?
So you said transformation. Are we ready? Is higher ed ready for that? And I shook my head. People can't see that on a podcast, but no, I don't think we're ready for it. But I also agree wholeheartedly that we're already here and in it. But that's almost partly what transformation is, right? So if you look at some of the theories out there on change, which is supposed to be my field of expertise, I guess, that we're really good at incremental change. We're good at understanding how to uh, think about what we want our future state to be, envision that, what it is, and then get there. In true transformational change, you don't know what the future state is. You don't know it until you start to sort of descend into chaos and the unknown and eventually start to understand what the new is going to look like. And then you can build towards it. And, from my perspective, that's where we are in the descension into chaos that we don't know. We know that we need to change quickly, more quickly, as it's been well laid out. We're not good at that because we haven't necessarily had to be. And probably there's some argument to be made why we shouldn't move quickly in education and necessarily be following the market forces that change very quickly. But now AI is changing some of that too. Um, I think not everyone is there yet. I think when I think of a big place like Penn State, there are spectrums of folks that are sort of grappling with this, all the way from those that are, I see it, I get it, I'm already changing the way I think, the way I teach, what I'm doing for my students, and I'm on board with that. To administrators that are thinking ahead and doing that, to those that are still, no, this is what higher education is. It's a public good. The sage on the stage is the way that it's supposed to work. It's what I do. I am not willing to change it. And there's nothing that you can do to make me change it because it's my right as an educator to do it this way. So I think that whole spectrum exists, within one institution, which is, my institution. That's my experience here. Um, so I think we'll eventually start to emerge onto what this starts to look like, and then we'll be able to say, yeah, now we can change into that. What I don't know, and this is the part that always flummoxes me in the world that I work in, is because things you mentioned AI are changing so fast. I don't know when we ever get to that. Like, okay, now I can see what the future looks like. We can build towards that. It's almost in industry, they would call it rapid prototyping or fast failure, right? It's doing things, not knowing the outcomes or that it needs to be perfect. And we're going to get it wrong, but we're going to continue changing into it until it gets to the place where it's right. Some of the ways that we handle change now, it's so slow that by the time you've implemented, what you started is different, or where you started is so vastly different that you almost have to start change all over again, right? So that sort of muscle in higher education and trying to figure out how we flex that in, in the dual governance model that we have, the higher education is a public good concept. Those are all the things that swirl in my world that, like, yes, we need to transform. Yes, we're already there, but are we ready? I don't know if I'd say we're ready. But we may never be ready, and that's okay.
I think you muted more.
Oh no, I was going to say something, but I was going to let you go ahead if you had something to add.
No, I was just thinking, I do believe that that education, is for the public good. I do. Uh, and I will continue to believe that it is for the public good. But I think we have to ask ourselves the question of what kind of education, for example, will prepare students, let's say for adaptation, for the kind of civic participation, for ethical judgment. What kind of education? And I think the whole guide by the side and sage on the stage, that doesn't work. I will stand up there and lecture, but so it pushes us to think about what kind, not just the modality, but what kind of education. Um, one of the things that one of the things that I did a couple of years ago at our opening convening for my division, um, was to just put on a put on a slide, um, several crests of some of the older universities in the United States, and frankly, even my high school, which was not in the United States. And what was interesting, I wanted for us to think about it. I know it looked quaint and so on because we have a crest that says just Veritas. It's very, I mean, just out there. We have one that says Lux and et Veritas. We will have, my high school is Cogito Ergo Sum. And it sounds like, well, that's really nice. That was a time gone by. I don't think so. I think that's foundational for who we are. How do we pursue what kind of education will we have for students where there is frankly geographic inequities in this country? What kind of education are we going to provide for students where there is a socio-economic issue at stake? So it forces us to think, not to toss aside those guiding philosophical principles about truth and light and thinking, but what kind of education are we going to have for these students in a world where they have to adapt? This is the world. I mean, the world is changing, and it doesn't depend on whether or not we think it's changing. It is changing. And so the issue of adaptation, actually matters. With AI, for example, maybe if there's a silver lining here, one of my friends who is an intelligence analyst that works for the Pentagon, his focus now is part of his focus, I should say, is on AI. And we were having this conversation just a couple of weeks ago, and he is saying the more they're working with this, the more they're coming to the conclusion that with the advancement of AI, um, they realize the need for the humanities. that, and it sounds almost counterintuitive on the surface, and yet here is the advancement of something that is there is no retreat here. It's a matter of, keeping up with this, but also now all of these sort of, rarefied ideas that we see in press, well, actually, they do matter. So we have to think about ethics. We have to think about integrity. We have to think about moral judgment. We have to think about community. We have to think about speech and about language and about the capacity to think. And all of those now, I think, are re-emerging as qualities that will define us in this society, in this world in which we find ourselves. So how we think about the kind of education, I think, will matter deeply, not just in the days and weeks, but in the years to come.
And Dr. Gosai, that was a great segue because I was that my literal next question was, what do you guys say to those people that say, like Jeremy said, the singularity is near and the pace of innovation is so fast that when one thing comes out, another thing comes out. What do you say to those people that say the advent of AI and the speed of innovation actually diminishes the need for the humanities?
Well, I mean, I could say, well, it doesn't. And, I don't want to get into well, the earth is flat. No, no, I honestly, it's a sphere. Well, I'm sorry, it's flat. I don't want to get into that, but, um, it is interesting to me that one of the challenges that I suspect all of us have now with AI and with academic work has to do with integrity. I mean, how do you maintain, right? It's out there. I mean, we can practically find anything that we want. All of our stuff is out there. By the way, we're the ones who wrote these things, right? AI does not generate new things. It's our stuff. It's out there, right? But it doesn't allow us to think. It doesn't generate kindness. It doesn't generate care. So when someone says, well, with AI, who needs the humanities? Well, actually, with AI, what it does, there is now we're compelled practically to think more about the humanities because it really challenges us as human beings in terms of how we function. Um, so we can't simply say that, well, we don't actually, now more than ever, there is a compelling reason for the humanities because we are the ones who will be able to use this language. I believe, honestly, in higher education, it's not the only place, but in higher education, we are the custodians of much of the goodness here. It's not AI. It's not going to be artificial intelligence. We are the custodians of that. And unless we bring that to our teaching and to our leadership, right, I think at some level we are going to be failing our students. We have to do that. Uh, to me, I would just say one other thing. I know that when the semester begins, and I don't know what your experience is, but when the semester begins, I think there is a tradition, particularly now with advancement of AI and so on, that we have to find ways that ensure that students don't cheat. Okay. I'd like a cultural shift where we do not begin with that, but begin with a level of trust, which, by the way, I'm not naive. That gets probably blown up in kind of like a Roman candle very quickly. I get it. But we begin with a different understanding of trust. What is it that you as students could bring to the table to help with the engagement? If you say you want to have a voice in this class, in this environment, don't allow yourself to abandon that voice by allowing AI to take over for you. Don't. Let your voice be heard literally and in so many other ways. To me, we begin with a positive view of what this educational enterprise is. as opposed to say, I've got to plug all of the holes to ensure you don't cheat, which, by the way, we can't. So we have to create an environment, it seems to me, where is positive and the engagement is positive. The role of students and the writing of papers and then the speaking of it, that we bring out the human quality. And I get it. Of course, there are always going to be the exceptions. I get it. But I think we need a cultural shift here.
Who wants to chime in next?
By the way, I just say one other thing. Just for the record, after all of that is said at our opening convening, you know, the whole auditorium does not stand up and says, "Okay, count me in." Some that doesn't happen. But you know, my whole point is that at least allow these ideas to sort of enter and filter into your consciousness for a while, right? So it becomes part of the landscape a little bit. And some things, as we all know, are important enough to repeat, and so we'll have to do that again and again and again. So no one is jumping for joy here, but at least, I believe these are some ideas that we need to well, we have to reckon with.
Sure. Anyone else? Go ahead, Jeremy.
A hard one to follow, because it was very well said. We talk a lot about AI and the human in the loop. And so, I just think about your question around humanities. I just think it is vitally important that we continue to understand that humans in the loop are important and humanity is important. So many of those skills and the education that goes into those spaces, I think, become more critical the more that AI gets infused into everything that we do. Or quickly, I think we can devolve to the worst, uh, perhaps, conditions of human nature. And there's a lot of deep philosophical, I think, conversations there as well around, what are we educating towards and for, in support of sort of the capitalistic mindset or something bigger and greater than that. And then AI gets wrapped into all of those things. Uh, I just don't I don't see a world where the humanities is not at the core of everything that we are and that we do, even if they don't measure the same way that direct applicable skills are, or the way that we're thinking about workforce development. Uh, and I hope that, and I see it here and I see it other places, in many conversations that I am, that many people are having that conversation. I think what Liz said earlier, a lot of them are still happening in our own sort of echo chamber. They're not getting to the broader audience that probably needs to be part of these conversations and hear it, from local government all the way through federal government, decision makers, business and industry folks, all the way to just workers in these different businesses. They're only hearing the snippets that they get, not these conversations and the importance of them. And I don't know how you broaden that, because everyone feels like they're completely overwhelmed and busy as it is already, and asking them to be engaged in more seems difficult. But absolutely critical that those remain part of who we are and what we do in education, in my opinion.
Dr. Teague, I think, if I remember correctly, one of your topics was completion or deletion. So
Mm.
I'm curious, how do you think about that? What does it mean and how does it apply to higher ed?
I love talking about this because I think this is one of those conversations that really stems from what Jeremy just reminded us of, that Liz had brought up, is we talk about so many things in the echo chamber, but we don't bring those conversations outside. And nature abhors a vacuum. So if we're not providing information, then people are going to make it up for themselves. And this is one of those topics that I feel that's happened. Um, we talk, we in higher ed, and also employers in the government outside of higher ed, love to report different statistics about the number of students who have some credit but no credential. And what it does is phrase all of that effort as failure. If you didn't earn a degree, then you didn't do the right thing. You didn't get what you needed. And I think that's a false narrative. I think the reason that we see so many people with some credit, no credential, is because they took what they needed, but they didn't necessarily have a formalized path to have what they needed at the moment recognized in a formal or transcripted way to document that. Liz, I loved what you were explaining about how things are bundled in your schools. Maybe this is what I need at this moment. Maybe I don't need all of this. Maybe because I don't need it. Maybe because I don't yet realize I need it. Maybe I can't afford it. Maybe I have other priorities with family and caregiving or anything that is not being academically engaged, especially for our adult learners. So one of the things I think is really important to start talking about is creating pathways that recognize the ability to step out and not stop out. And I say that not because it sounds pithy, it does, but truly because we phrase these things as you didn't meet your goal. It really is how a student defines success. And success may be, listen, I'm a small business owner. I'm a baker. I'm an amazing baker. I want to open a bakery shop. And what I don't know how to do, though, is basic accounting. I'm not really great with marketing. I need a little bit of HR knowledge. You don't need, I always hesitate to say this as a higher ed leader, you might not necessarily need a whole 120 credit hour degree to do that. What you might need is a 15 credit certificate in entrepreneurship that gives you what you need at that moment. And that is success for that person. We might have somebody else who says, I want to be deeply engaged in business and I want to understand all the models that come along with that because I'm not yet sure what I want to do. That student, regardless of whether they're the new majority adult learner, like Dr. Gosai said, it's we give labels so that we can categorize people. They all need something different. At 18, when you're looking ahead to what you're going to need at 22, 120 credit degree might be exactly what you need because it gives you the space to figure out where you fit in the world. But if you're a 35 or a 40-year-old learner, you might need that 90 credit degree, or you might need a graduate certificate. You might need a micro credential. We talk and we talk and we talk, but we don't have calls to action that many institutions are supporting because the people like me that love data, we tend to focus almost exclusively on degree completion. And there are models that we can adopt, we can create. We don't even have to adopt them, we can create them to talk about how we redefine success on an individual student level. And again, some of the work happening at UMass Global, I'm incredibly proud of because we're in the process of, we're calling it bricking the curriculum. And the idea that we're reorganizing curriculum at the undergrad level into 15 credit certificates. And they're built in a stackable way. So you come in, you take what you need. And if you decide that that's what you need to be successful at this moment, you step out, you were successful. If you decide either I want more and I didn't know I needed it, or I want more because I know that I have a longer path, then you step up into the next certificate. And what that does is reorders this idea of no some credit, no credential, that's actually society's version of failure, but that's not necessarily an individual's version of failure. So just flipping that conversation, but being willing to do the work to reorganize structures to meet these varied pathways.
And to your point about not necessarily adopting but creating things, we also have to have those leaders, whoever it is that can get that message out there. So we have organizations like in my industry, we have CQ, and we have these conferences where people get together and talk about what's important, and then they go to Washington to say, hey, this is important. And we need people that can do so in a way that puts it to the individuals who are coming back saying, no, we want to, what's the ROI? What's the data? What are all these different things? but what's actually important to the students. When you talk to so many students, they don't care about a piece of paper anymore. That's not the end goal for them. The end goal is for them to get something they can use, to your point. They can use it and then maybe step out for a little while, go do something with it. And then as they run that bakery, they realize, oh, maybe I need to know something else now. And then they come back, but it's allowing students to make those decisions without feeling bad by higher ed individuals are saying, oh, don't, and I don't think people are saying don't be a failure, but that's the meaning that students take from it is I'm a failure if I stop out, if I don't complete something. But at the end of the day, it's that open door to say, okay, you got what you needed. Now we welcome you back. Come back to us. Come get more when you're ready. And maybe it's not only when you're ready, but when we're ready for you, because now we have something new for you that makes sense. And I don't think we think about that part of it enough is the ways that we need to keep offering new things. You can't just, most institutions aren't doing this anymore, but you can't just offer an MBA forever to be the same exact thing. There needs to be different things added to that so that students can keep coming back and maybe they build those bricks together to eventually get to a higher level degree, but that maybe wasn't the end goal at when they started. And I think it's getting individuals to see that and us not having to consistently defend ourselves for knowing what the students need and having that outside pressure telling us, no, this is what you need to do. And this is what we think students need. We're the ones working with the students every day. We're the ones seeing what they need. And the students can be advocates in that as well. But a lot of times the students don't have the forum to, go to Washington or to go to a state meeting or to go do something to help us say, no, we don't need you guys stepping in and telling us all the stuff we have to do. This is what we actually need. And until those voices can be heard, we're going to consistently get this pressure to, why is it so expensive? Why is it this? Why do they have to be there for so long? It's a reimagination of it, and it's making sure that we're being what students need, because that's what college should be. It should be, what do we need and how can we come back? And I want my students to come back time and time again, not because I want their money, because I want them to grow as humans, to grow as individuals, to grow in their personal and professional lives. And I think we need to make sure that others see that as part of what higher education is. And that goes back to the very first thing that we were talking about at the beginning. So all of these things build together, and the pressures that everybody is under, it's figuring out how to make that work in society today.
Yes. And I think where we do ourselves a disservice is, at the core of each of our hearts, regardless of the type of work we do in education, we are educators. If it's educating other staff members, if it's educating students, if it's educating, those around us, we are here in the business of selling ideas. And that doesn't have to be a separate conversation where we make revenue a dirty word. There is a reality that we need money to keep the lights on, to keep doing amazing things for students. So I think when we think about, what we're asking financially of our programs, rather than saying, if you just serve up an MBA, you have a limited pipeline of people that are going to go through the MBA. To me, it's not just what is education, but what is the function of a university or college? And to me, the original intent of them, going way, way back, is that they were social hubs of ideas and community and belonging. And that should be no different today. And it should be no different whether you're a community college or whether you're an Ivy, whether you're online or whether you're in person. They are places that people develop a sense of belonging. And when folks have a sense of belonging, they constantly return back, because we want, part of global citizenship is producing lifelong learners. Learning doesn't stop, much to my 15-year-old chagrin. It doesn't stop the minute you get a high school diploma. It doesn't stop the minute you walk the stage with your bachelor's degree. You're constantly learning all the time. So if you're developing a lifelong relationship with your learners, you do have the chance to look at, say, those bricked laddered achievements, but you also have the chance to say, you might be done with all your learning in a formal sense, but you might want to just know more about the world. you might want to keep abreast of big ideas. So one of the things that's most exciting to me in general conversation is how do we reframe the idea of extended education? Extended education is like you did it and now you're going to go do a little more. To me, I like the idea of lifelong learning, that I might have to come back for a skill. Maybe I need you to teach me how to use AI. That's probably something many schools are grappling with right now. But I also want to be able to engage in dialogue about political changes or about what's happening in the world with climate change or these big ideas that you might not have another social hub or community to be able to have dialogue with. So not just what is education, but what is a university? What is a college? And how do we help, particularly in a time when so many people, adults and younger individuals, are experiencing sense of division and mental health challenges? How do we step in and say we're part of your community and you're part of ours and there's space for you here? That to me, I think, is not separate from the financial discussion. I think it's part of it.
I couldn't agree more. I think both what Liz said and Jennifer, we should not lose track of the exact principles that in the first instance established the need for universities and colleges. All of those principles, they are in the humanities. There is a reason why we talk about core requirements. And I love languages. That's one of my areas. The word means heart. It's the Latin for heart. That's why we talk about core. It gets to the heart of what it means to be educated. We don't want to lose track. And even though it might be a little pithy, as Dr. Teague said, I do like this idea of stepping out and stopping out. And so, by the way, just to be upfront about it, I absolutely plan to steal this idea. Um, uh, but I will attribute it to you. But to talk about, because one of these has to do with almost what I would say an indictment of the institute, the stopping out. The other is actually a kind of retaining of a relationship and an invitation to return as that time, whenever that time is. And I think I think it's really a profound idea of ensuring that students can return and because there is more to do. Institutions, certainly residential, but all institutions should be a place of belonging. I mean, if you do not connect, if you do not find for a little while a home in those institutions, you are not gonna, I mean, you will leave. You have to have, and so we have to create an environment where that is really genuinely important and not some kind of an appendix to what we do. It has to be really at the heart of what we do. And it has to be an institutional thing. It can't be simply because one of us happens to be a very nice human being and therefore it has to be it has to have the institutional kind of embracing of these kinds of ideals. And I mean, where I am, it's tough. I can't speak for where you are, but sometimes, the disconnect between what we say and what we promise and what we deliver is palpable. And we have to sort of bridge that. We have to have students who come to us for an education to find a place that they can call home for a while. Um, and I think it's an ongoing, not just a challenge, but it's an ongoing invitation for us at academic institutions to ensure that we do that.
Everybody really was excited about this topic. Jeremy, you got anything to add?
Uh, yes, but I'm trying to think how to say it well.
Sure, sure.
Um, I mean, all of those things are true and fascinating, and there's a part of me, and I don't want to lump everybody into this, but this is me maybe being cynical or maybe real. I don't know. I don't know that we've all and all institutions have the best outcomes for our student necessarily at heart. And I think um, what Jennifer was talking about stop out and all the effort that goes into trying to get students to graduate. Again, I don't know that it's in the best interest of the student, but it's in the best interest of the institution for their own metrics and other reasons. But I also think, at least for a public institution like Penn State, some of that has been forced upon us by the degradation of the support of the public good for education, right? You've all seen the X graph, I think, that shows public institutions, and in 60 years ago, they were funded mostly off of tax dollars subsidizing tuition, and now it's the complete opposite, that it's really on the backs of the students to do that. Do I think there's waste in higher ed? Of course. We can do a much better job, but we've almost been forced to move towards operating like a true business. And in that case, the students aren't the thing that's most important in the long run. It is the operational ability of the institution to bring in enough revenue to cover its cost and do all the things that we think we should do, which maybe is too much at a place like Penn State. So I think some of that burden is shared both institutionally and societally. And again, that echo chamber idea and trying to get out and have those conversations and really, you know, get our politicians to understand, and our business partners that are, reaping the benefits of the students that we educate, or the rest of society reaping those benefits. And then the other, I don't know how many of you all are R1 institutions, but we are. So then the research part of it comes in too, right? And that becomes such a big part of who we are as an institution. But again, a lot of that isn't about the student outcome. That's faculty and their own research and what we're putting out into society. All good things. But maybe what we were meant to be at one time has morphed because of all of those things. So again, I think there's a lot of looking in the mirror and then outside conversations that go into transforming ultimately where we best sit within society, and what we should be doing. But I'm a firm believer in education as a public good for society and as in general, and that at the end of the day, it really should be our students. And again, if the best thing for a student is to start and they get what they need and they stop out and they move on into the world and do great things and potentially come back, that's great. That's a success for that particular student, but we're going to view it as a failure because it's going to show up as a failure on our part not to get them through to a 4-year degree or whatever that might be. So take that for what I guess it's worth.
Sure, sure.
Maybe I do have a rebuttal on that. Um, I don't, I think that's a heavy dose of cynicism first, followed up by realism second. I do think universities and colleges are businesses. And I think one of the lies we've told ourselves for so long is that we somehow are immune from, needing to optimize costs and needing to secure revenue streams. Those things are true, whether we couch them in, magical language about the nature of education or not. Because ultimately, as I said earlier, you got to keep the lights on. And you keep the lights on so that you continue doing good things. If there is an institution, and we all know that there are, that don't have students at the center of what they're doing, those are bad actors. And, are they the majority of the industry? I can't say. My optimism would like to believe no.
Right.
I think this is where we can have the most impact as senior leaders, is by ensuring that, I've just been through budgeting at my institution, making sure that the budget decisions we're making, even when we have to have those tough conversations with staff and faculty, to me, everything in some way needs to tie back to the learner. And if it doesn't, then I need a very clear understanding of why we should be doing it. And, I'm at a relatively small institution. Imagine the impact if the R1s, if the Ivies, if the large state systems we're asking those same questions. So it's not that we shouldn't be worried about revenue. We would be foolish and we would be derelict in our duty as administrators if we weren't making sure at least that we're operating in the black. The other piece of this is, we're saying education is a public good. Is that supported? And I don't mean this in a political sense. Is this supported in general by any administration? Does our government hold education as a public good? I'm going to go out on a limb and say that based on the accelerated cost of tuition that has been allowed to perpetuate in higher ed, I don't know that we see it in America as a public good. If we saw it as a public good, we would have the types of systems that exist in many, many other countries where there aren't loans, there are subsidies, or whether education is such an important investment that tuition is covered fully by grants from the university or there's capped tuition amounts. That's nothing that anybody wants to talk about in the US, because when we constrain, and I know it's easy for me to say this, or easy, or sitting in the type of institution I do, when we constrain revenue growth, we can't fund fancy new football stadiums. We can't fund new living quarters for students that are going to entice them to come to us. A lot of the bells and whistles of higher ed are funded by excessive tuition costs. And until really large university players are willing to say, what is the price of not having that? Or how do we assess research to ensure that there is some kind of public utility as a result of it, and it's not a vanity project? How do we take those factors into account? That's not going to be a reimagination of higher ed. That's going to be a complete reset. I do think we're nearing that tuition point where the public, students, employers, parents, the government is telling us you're too expensive for the return that students and parents are putting into this. If we don't embrace that feedback and act on it, then there will come a time where universities will become less relevant and it will be focused more on like the work Liz is doing, where it's purely career oriented. And there is a place for those types of organizations, but there's space for universities as social hubs as well. So I'm gonna balance my naive optimism and your realistic pessimism by saying that it's only us inside the house that are going to be able to make those changes. And if you're working at a university and you don't think of students with every decision you make, you may have chosen the wrong profession.
Yeah,
Well
and
said.
I totally agree. I mean, I think first of all, Jeremy, you're too young to be cynical. Um, and no one is old enough to be cynical, so someplace in there, right? Um, and I'm in this as a vocation, right? I suspect all of us could have professions that, if in fact the financial gains were the driving force, we will likely, have professions that would afford that. I believe in this, and I really do believe in the common good. And I believe that um, as we educate our students in whatever way, right, it shapes the world in which we live. Uh, and I'm committed to this. This is something that is not simply in theory, but I think there are challenges that we face. And right now, about almost 50% of all university, excuse me, undergrads are from community colleges who have transferred. And I think so much of that has to do with the cost. And we better face that. Yes, it has to do with other opportunities to be sure, but it has to do with the cost, which has increasingly become prohibitive. Uh, it's just, where many students who probably, not just in terms of qualification, but who in terms of the grand idea of going to a university simply cannot afford it in terms of what the outcome might be in for a job, for employment. Um, and so we have to come to grips with this, but I don't I I don't want to be in this space um, and simply give up on the public good. I believe in the public good. I believe that we could make a difference in how we educate our students. Um, and that's the kind of hope that I have going forward, so that we do not remain stagnant, so that we do not remain that tied to a status quo that has where we are tethered to something, where we sort of say we believe in the public good, but for all practical purposes have abandoned the public good. Um, so I'm much more hopeful in terms of what we do. At the end of the day, what Jennifer said. Um, if we do not believe that we're in this to educate our students, at the end of the day, we are teachers. Everything else is secondary. We are teachers. If we don't believe that we teach, I think we should go look elsewhere for something. Uh, we're educators. That's what we are. We have titles, to be sure. We have responsibilities, to be sure. We have credentials, to be sure. But it would not be the credentials that ultimately will make us good at what we do. It will not be. It's who we bring as ourselves. So,
Awesome.
no, Jeremy, you're too young to be cynical. And
It's
by the way,
awesome.
my daughter is a Penn State grad.
We are.
Yeah,
We go. I think Dr. Kosai has to hop off, but
at
I'll
3:30,
transit.
unfortunately.
Absolutely. We appreciate you, my friend. It's been awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to
Abs-
have a chance to visit here. Be well.
Absolutely. We'll have you back.
Okay, take
So
care.
the last topic was, you know, do you guys see any of the changes that the Department of Education has made impacting anything that we've discussed already? Anyone can start.
Yes. Um,
I think that hesitation is exactly where Jennifer's. It's yeah, but go ahead, Jen.
yeah. I think that there is a knee-jerk reaction to want to see everything, thinking really hard about this. I think there's a knee-jerk reaction to, regardless of which side of the political fence you fall on, that whenever there's an administration that does not align with your personal beliefs, to say all bad, everything coming out. And I really want to honor a few things that I think have come out of the current administration. And one of them relates directly to something we were just talking about, which is this idea of incorporating AI competencies and recognizing that many of the skills you need to effectively and ethically use AI are actually those good old fashioned durable skills. The AI action plan that was put out by the administration in July 2025, I think it's the third tenet, don't quote me, but is the idea of how do we increase workforce proficiency in the use of AI. And there was a really well-crafted competency framework that was released as part of that work to say, what kind of skills do we need? And then how do we actually integrate those into curriculum, whether it's K-12, whether it's higher ed, or whether it's lifelong learning? I think there's a lot that we can take away from there. I think the conversations about accreditation maybe are a little bit more extreme than what many of us would have anticipated, because again, higher ed doesn't move fast. I think at the same time, it is productive that every player in higher ed is holding up the mirror. And if we know we need to move swiftly, our accreditors have to Liz's point, have to be able to move swiftly as well. So I think stimulating conversations in respectful and productive ways about what is the nature of accreditation, what is it providing, what benefit is it to the student in the end? Is it validating that processes are being followed? Is it just a rubber stamp that you pay a fee for? is it really helping elevate the quality of programs, or is it simply a roadblock between a student and the type of learning that they need to be exposed to at any given moment? So I do see those two specific things as some progress and productive progress from the current administration.
And I think that's important, to your very first point about it doesn't matter your political side of things or your personal views, because there are good things that are going to come out of the changes. There are some I agree with, some I disagree with. But when it comes to that accreditation side of things, and I think my heart is in accreditation right now because I live in it so much on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. But there are roadblocks in place here in the United States that other countries do not have. So I had an amazing opportunity where I was working with an institution who is accredited in many countries, 60 different countries. They have accreditation. They can award degrees, bachelor's, master's, doctorates. They're trying to get accreditation in the United States, and there are so many hurdles that they can't get through because of how higher education and accreditation are in the United States. They don't want a physical presence. They are fully online. They allow students to take classes from Spain, Portugal, Brazil, all over the world to craft a degree that is meaningful to them. So it may not be a degree from one institution, it's all these different places. But the way we do accreditation, that sounds like, the buzzword, a consortium agreement. But at the end of the day, there is this entity, there is a university that looks at the skills, the credentials, the outcomes of these different courses to say, yes, that is now a degree, but they don't have the means by which to get accreditation in the United States so that students here can access Title IV funding or the other things that accreditation does afford us the ability to. And so this process, I've worked with this institution for years and they still haven't figured out how to jump that hurdle. And so maybe some of the things that are happening now can lead to other types of education coming in that have the ability for students to do this, but we're not there yet. And so we have to get to that point. And so accreditation has to be agile. It has to change. It has to morph into things that would work. But we also don't want to get to a point where we get so myopic about the things that we're trying to get out of accreditation. And, they have to have this particular outcome. And, we want to have all these, platforms where students can look through dashboards with data and all this stuff. Can't tell you how many students are actually going to go to how many students go to iPads to actually look and see what's going on. Not many, right? But that's a hurdle that institutions have to get through to do things like this. So I think there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of change that would be really, really good. It's just finding that balance of the change that's going to be helpful, but also makes sense to those who are trying to push them. And we don't have the answers on this. And it's going to be years while we unpack what's currently happening and where we need to go. But it's having those people in Washington, across the states that have enough knowledge to help get us to the right place instead of trying to pigeonhole us into, very specifics, if that makes sense.
So I would agree with all of those statements as far as, the impacts, both causing us to look at things differently and potential, benefits in the long run. I think the difficult part is the the constant change and then the wonder when it comes. So all of a sudden you spin up and you do all of this work and then something changes again, or wait a second, we were just kidding. That's not what we actually meant. I think more impactful to us here at Penn State, and which caused a considerable amount of work, was the threat from the Office of Budget Management and the cap on F&A. Right? That's a huge change for a place like Penn State. And now you're talking about significant budget deficits in the research space that you either have to stop doing research altogether in certain areas, or you have to subsidize that through our undergraduate tuition or graduate tuition, which again, now we're getting back to that lever and tuition being too expensive. So that created a ton of work on, well, okay, what does that mean? What are we going to do? and then they kind of backed off for at least until the fall. So I think that's the hardest part is the constant start stop, not sure, yes, no. But I also think the benefit around all of it is it's forcing us to look at things that maybe we wouldn't have looked at that we should have been. And I do think there will be positives, at least in Penn State across the board, on being forced to look at things that we weren't looking at and going, oh yeah, there's something we could do and should do here differently, um, as far as that goes. So, I think that has been the research side has been the bigger driver here in some conversations, but plenty of others on the Department of Education side too. But I think it's just we'll continue to move as things move and administrations change and shift and priorities will shift and then we will shift again. And again, I hope maybe our muscle memory is being built as institutions and administrators on how to shift and be agile and change things as those change. And so we're a little bit better at it in the long run.
Jeremy, I like that last point in particular because again, higher ed's never been known to move quickly. And when then there have been big changes, from an administration, they typically have come with a little bit more lead time. And so it re-entrenched us in the idea that, well, this might change before we even get there. And no denying it's painful, and stressful, individually and institutionally, to not know the direction that we're supposed to be swimming for some of these things. And another takeaway can be that this is teaching us how to be agile. That, right now it feels like survival to try and navigate some of these processes. But what this means is, you had a great example earlier of talking about rapid prototyping, that, you fail fast, fail forward. The idea though with education is that we feel like it happens in discrete moments and that we're going to get to this point where everything's okay. That'll never be the case. No matter who's in office, no matter what the next big blow up is after AI, we're never done. And that's part of an advancement in how we credential, in the types of programs that we offer, but also in how we approach the idea of continuous improvement. We talk about continuous improvement in terms of student outcomes and what are we doing to help improve at that level. What we don't talk about as much is continuous improvement inside the organization. We fill out those parts of the accreditation visit, but I would hazard a guess that sometimes those are almost secondary. When if I'm asking for a student to do a little bit better every time, what am I asking of my institution and my role in it? How do I do a little bit better every time? And I think the speed some of these changes are rolling out is forcing us to evaluate that. And in this moment, it feels chaotic. How do we take some learning from this to maybe break some of the systems and policies that are no longer serving us, that we just had because it was status quo? And then how do we really focus in on what really moves the needle for our learners? And how do we double down on those things and let go of some of the things that aren't serving what our core mission is? So thanks for mentioning that point.
Sure. I never would have imagined 15 years ago when I started here that I'd have an office that does exactly that for the institution. I think that's kind of a new thing in higher education in general. There are more starting to pop up, but it is getting to that. Well, how do you then get into a place of continuous process improvement? I get often asked like, okay, well, when are we going to stop changing? Because I'm tired. I'm tired of changing, right? The change fatigue is a real thing. Well, but the reality is it's not. It's you're going to need to build a muscle. It's like working out. You fatigue it to the point where all of a sudden it takes longer to fatigue again. That eventually it just becomes part of existing in this space of somewhat constant change. I've often wondered, do we look back with rose-colored glasses because it's probably been somewhat like this for 67, like it was never just stable and nothing was changing, but it felt that way, years ago and things were happening at a slower pace. And maybe they weren't. It's just because now we're in a different part of time, and what that looks like. But I do think that is part of what institutions are actively starting to build. and will help us in the long run, I think, be a little bit more agile and understanding how you move through these change processes in a better way that doesn't feel so disruptive, um,
Mm. And damaging.
and damaging. Yeah.
I and I do think the short answer there is yes, there's nothing new under the sun. I think these things were happening forever and all time. If you go back, there's really, I'm not a historian. I only know enough to be dangerous. And I remember reading some communications about the split between Oxford and Cambridge and the bickering that happened between the leaders of these organizations. It just reminds you that this stuff has been happening for 500 years. You just now can open up your email or your news and find out about it like that. So it means, with any kind of technology, it means we get too much information too quickly and often before it's been fully vetted. And so we're responding, it's like a squirrel in a park. We're turning every time something shiny flashes at us. And I think it used to be rolled out maybe with a little bit more intention and took a little longer for word to reach. So it feels overwhelming in a way that it used to not.
I can't think of a better place to end it than right here. If you guys have any closing remarks, please share them. But if not, feel free to let everybody know about the novel you're working on, where they can find you, and what's up next for you.
I'm the worst at this part, so I'll just thank you, Kamar, for having me back, and to Liz and Jeremy and Dr. Gasoy for spending time talking about these ideas. I love the idea of using podcasts as a way to bring these discussions outside of the halls and bringing them hopefully to people's ears who might not normally engage in them or be exposed to them. Anybody looking for information about the cool stuff happening at UMass Global, you're welcome to follow UMass Global on LinkedIn. You're also welcome to follow me, Jennifer Teague. So it's just / Dr. Teague on LinkedIn. And I'll be sharing more about some really amazing, innovative, with a capital I, programs that we'll be launching this fall and next fall.
Sure. All right. Dr. Fogel, what about you? What are you working on?
Oh, my love and everything is accreditation, as I said earlier. So, as we navigate these accreditation milestones and things that are happening, between that and faculty development, my one of the big things I focus a lot on is faculty orientation and onboarding because we have these instructors who are coming in to be teachers, and we want to make sure that they're ready for the landscape that they're coming into, even if they do come from a business background or in my sector, from a broadcasting background. So if you've got things you want to talk about and how you can work with your faculty, with your accreditation, with onboarding, anything of that nature, it's Elizabeth Fogel. I'm on LinkedIn, elizabeth.fogel@gmail.com.
All right. Jeremy, what about you? How are you transforming the world?
One podcast at a time. I will
Love it, man.
echo Jennifer's sentiment of it's always great to be on here, Kamar, and I think these types of conversations, the more that we can get them out there, are great. And I always meet these fascinating individuals from around the higher ed landscape that I didn't know before. So hopefully, we'll stay connected in that way. In my world, everything is AI at the moment, and what does that mean at Penn State? I am learning how to build agents, and I'm not a tech person, so maybe I'm a good person to be testing a bunch of this stuff out. And a lot of it's on my own journey and trying to figure those things out. You can certainly find me on LinkedIn. I don't think there are a whole lot of Jeremy Beans, spelled just like the vegetable, out there. Or just email me at Penn State, jeremy.bean@psu.edu. If you want to chat about what we're doing or you're doing. Again, I'm a big believer in the more conversations we have, the more folks that are connected to what we do, the better we're all going to be in the long run in higher education in the US and in the globe. So again, thanks for bringing folks together, Kamar, and doing this. I'm so glad you're a Penn Stater.
That was good. Well, I think we're going to run with that tagline as well, right? The Everything Higher Ed podcast, transforming higher HigherEd one podcast at a time.